So Making History is an organisation which works with people from all walks of life to try and help women and children however we can who are escaping different forms of abuse and violence. But I never really thought about working with refugee women or children in particular until the story of Alan Kurdi broke out in 2015. And reading his story inspired me to try and find out more about women and children refugees and why it was I wasn't really seeing them in the papers or hearing about them on the radio. And that led me to start going out to Calais and Dunkirk in France under Making History. So for the first 8-9 convoys, which we completed over a year and a half, we mobilised people from all backgrounds to try and gift sleeping bags and tents and shoes and socks and whatever it was that was needed. And after a while I realised that actually I needed to do this aside from Making History so that our UK works weren't affected. So I set up Onjali's refugee aid team, which works as a separate entity, and now we deliver aid whenever we can, and we've been doing that for the past 3.5 years. So the story was inspired by a lot of amazing young children that I saw in the camps who, despite having been through awful things that we can't even imagine sometimes, still had the capacity to smile and make friends and laugh and be cheeky and play games just as children are supposed to do. And there was one in particular, a baby named Rayhan, who I was privileged enough to meet just a few days after he was born, and who I lost contact with. And in 2017, which is about a year and a half after I met him, I fell really ill, and all I could think about was Ahmed and what his mum must have gone through to travel so far and to place herself in so much danger to try and get her, to get Rayhan to safety. So that led to the creation of the boy at the back of the class, because all I could think about was what would happen to Rayhan if at the age of 8 or 9 he finally did make it to the UK. What would happen to him if he walked into a class one day without any friends, without being able to speak the language, and not having his family with him. And yeah, so that was the birth of the boy at the back of the class. No, so the book was always written from the perspective of the narrator based in the UK, because I think there's been amazing stories written from the perspective of the refugees themselves, and I didn't really even think about going at it from that angle, because I wanted it very much to be a story from a child in the UK who was meeting a refugee for the first time, and I was hearing of lots of stories from our refuge shelters that we work with about children who are going into school and feeling frightened. So I wanted to write it from the perspective of someone who wanted to be a friend to someone who was a stranger. And the first draft, that's the way it was written, that's the way it was born. So there wasn't any other kind of way of telling that story, I don't think, for me at least. I didn't want it to matter what the narrator's name or gender was, and it shouldn't matter in many ways. And it was something that I didn't want to overtake the story of Ahmed and the narrator's relationship with Ahmed. So I wanted to keep that a secret. I wanted it not to matter so much, and hopefully it's succeeded in a way. I get very excited when people ask, who is it, what is this person? I'm like, oh, I'll read till the end and find out. And a lot of people have had their assumptions hopefully kind of overturned by finding out who the narrator is. So it always makes me secretly glad. I think that's where my editor and copy editor have come in, because there were some darker moments, and I think that particularly the scene where Ahmed is firstly telling his story through the drawings, and secondly trying to convey to the narrator what happened to his sister. Those are very hard moments to try and relate to the gravitas of what happened to Ahmed, but also do it in a way which wasn't going to upset readers too much. So there were darker moments in the book that my editor and copy editor really helped to kind of lighten and convey in a way that wouldn't be too devastating to children. And actually, I think my anger actually came out in the acknowledgements. So when I was writing the acknowledgements, I wrote about what was happening and how angry it made me. And I think my editor wrote saying, this is really devastating, and I think if kids read this, they're going to get really upset and feel like there's no hope left in the world. So maybe we can lighten it a little bit. So there was definitely an attempt to make sure that the horrendousness of the situation wasn't overtaking the sense of hope and friendship, which was the key messages. Wow, it's been absolutely surreal, and I can't believe that the book is actually being read, which is great. But to be voted for by children as part of this massive award has been absolutely amazing. And I think it'll take me a few years to grasp that it's actually happened. So yeah, I need a bit of time to get my head around that one. It was really important that the different levels of misunderstanding or fear be conveyed in the book somehow. And I actually realised my own racisms in a way, because I actually didn't realise that I'd made all the bad guys and the baddies Cockney. So my editor was like, is there a class issue that we're having here? So Mr. Greggs was actually super Cockney, and he was then made into kind of dapper gentleman, because I realised actually some of my own views of what racism, sounds like or is packaged needs to be challenged as well. So it's really important because I think children do see the different ways that different grown-ups talk about the situation and interpret a situation. So I wanted to convey that as much as possible without being too uniform in doing that, if that makes sense. So I think books are absolutely crucial to getting us thinking about new worlds, other people's realities, because if we don't have that, we're stuck in our own little bubble. It's very easy to be stuck in our own little bubble. For me, I think so many books have done that, from Wilkie Collins books and Charles Dickens books to Uncle Tom's Cabin, to so many fantastic female authors as well. They've made me realise actually that my reality is very unique to other people's realities, and in order to be able to access those realities I need the domain of books. I hate being asked that question, because that's like asking me which star is the brightest in the sky. I have so many childhood books. I was addicted to Sherlock Holmes. I was addicted to the Famous Five books. I wanted to be George growing up. I wanted to be Nancy Drew growing up. I wanted to be Poirot growing up. Some of my favourite reads are Anne of Green Gables, Secret Garden, Five Children and It, the Narnia books, The Hobbit. So yeah, I just have too many. I can't really choose one, because they're all different and they all made my world richer in a different way. It's hugely important. So some of the books that I've mentioned, my most favourite childhood books when I was growing up didn't feature anyone who looked like me. And the reason why I mentioned Tintin in the book at the back of class is because it was the first comic book I came across where I saw people from other countries represented. And I think there's one adventure where Tintin is in Saudi Arabia, and I was like, oh my God, there's a picture in here that looks like my uncle. So that was the first time I saw anyone who looked like my uncle remotely in a book. And I don't think my uncle would appreciate it, but it was a big deal to me. Not having access to books where where you have people who look like you and sound like you and live the same kind of lives like you is hugely important, and it's not something I clocked on until I was a little bit older actually. So growing up reading those fantastic books where nobody looked like me or lived the same reality as me didn't really matter until I was a little bit older. It's so important, because if you're not growing up in a world where your experiences and the faces that are part of your family are being represented in a wider world, it can make a huge impact if you're not seeing that out there. So for me, when I was 17, my college teacher took me to see a live performance by Benjamin Zephaniah, and that was the first black poet that I'd ever seen. I didn't even know that there could be black. I mean, we were reading Shakespeare and we were reading Chaucer, but you're not really hearing about an amazing, history of black poets. So that was my first access to a black poet, and the first time I realised that actually someone who wasn't white could be a poet and could be an extraordinary, amazing oral storyteller. So that woke me up to a new reality, if you like. And I think for children to see that at a very young age, and to see authors coming into schools who are from a wide variety of backgrounds, means that the world opens up, and means that your possibilities as a potential something opens up as well. So it's just so important, and I think one of the most crucial things that any school can do for their pupils. Yeah, so The Star Outside My Window is being written. I promise, I'm promising that to my editor. It's coming out in October, hopefully, and I'm still kind of on a third redraft, retelling of the story. And it will hit on the very serious issue of domestic violence, something that I think a lot of children are living with and can't speak about, and are taught not to speak about. And it's something that Making History tackles on a daily basis. I wanted to ensure that children of a younger age, who aren't teenagers but who are at primary school, are able to connect with something that's quite dark, but at the same time, again, like the boy at the back of the class, hopefully conveyed in a lighter way. So the story is that there's a very special young girl and her brother who go in the search for a star, and that star has the heart of their mother, and there's a very sad reason as to why they need to go on the hunt for this star. But it's also very exciting, and it features the National Observatory, and you'll learn a lot about star constellations and the stories behind them. So hopefully we'll be able to again tackle a very much needed subject which needs to be tackled in through the domain of a book. So let's see how that goes. So my first initial books that I secured my agent with was a trilogy around chocolate. It was a chocolate adventure, and so I spent about 8-9 years writing it and researching it, and doing it after work and before work and in my lunch break, and it took me about 8-9 years to secure an agent with that book. And The Boy at the Back of the Class wasn't even an idea. It was the chocolate book was going to get published, if ever, and that was what was going to be my books. So my agent was in the midst of trying to get me to rewrite the chocolate books when the idea for The Boy at the Back of the Class happened, and this happened to be the first book that was published. The chocolate books were sent out to someone at Penguin, I think, and they wrote back a detailed 2-page rejection, which featured the words, I think it was something like over-descriptive twaddle. I've got all my rejection letters. They're actually at the back of a diary, so I keep a diary. So at the back of my diaries, and I love getting them out and going, nah, and just putting them back in. So so there's a lot of them though. There's a lot of them. I think one of them I actually burnt because I was so angry. So I actually lit a fire in my garden and burnt it. So that's the only one I don't have, and I can't remember which company it was. But there's something satisfying about getting a rejection letter, and also it does push you to look at your manuscript again and to rework stuff, because there's got to be a reason why they're rejecting you. So with each rejection letter I got, I would go back and rewrite, or cry and then rewrite, and then try and send again in a new way. So yeah, you just have to collect them, do what you want with them, but know that they've been given for a reason, and try and improve your work. My advice would be to don't give up on your writing, first of all. Continue writing, continue with your ideas, continue researching them. And I used the writer's handbook. That was my kind of A to Z of how to start, and who to approach, and how to approach agents. So yeah, just make sure that you do your research on the companies that you're submitting your manuscripts to and the agents you're trying to approach, and just keep at it. It may take years, but it will happen somehow, hopefully.